The wind kicked up red dust as Eli Cutter crested the final hill, his truck rattling like it might fall apart any second. He eased off the gas, rolled to a stop, and stared through the bug-splattered windshield at the stretch of land he now legally owned. It was supposed to be empty, untouched for years, according to the paperwork and the lawyer, who seemed far too eager to close the sale. But what Eli saw made his chest tighten. There were footprints in the dirt. Large ones. Deep. Not just from boots, but barefoot. Massive, bare footprints. And then came the figures. 3 women were working the fields just beyond the rusted gate. Not girls. Women. And they weren't just tall, they were towering. Easily over 7 feet, each one built like a living sculpture of strength and grace. They moved with fluid purpose, turning soil and feeding livestock like they'd been doing it every day for years. Eli stepped out of the truck slowly. The dry air hit his lungs like sandpaper. He adjusted his jacket, unsure whether to approach or turn around and pretend he hadn't seen anything. That's when the tallest of the women looked up. She didn't squint or shield her eyes. She just stared at him, expression unreadable, like she'd been expecting this moment. Her hair, a cascade of silver-white curls, shimmered against the sun as she raised one hand not to wave, but to signal. "Stay there." The other 2 stopped working. The second had hair like honey-glazed bronze, a wide scar down one cheek that only made her look more regal. The third, her skin deep and glowing, leaned against a pitchfork like she'd been watching him long before he saw her. "Eli Cutter," the first woman called out. His stomach dropped. He hadn't told anyone he was coming yet, not even his brother. "How do you know my name?" he asked, his voice louder than he meant. She started walking toward him, each step deliberate, confident. Her long strides kicked up dry earth, but her gaze never wavered. The other 2 flanked her until the 3 stood just a few yards from him. "This is our land," the bronze-haired one said, her voice velvet and steady. "We've lived here for years, waiting." "For what?" Eli asked, every instinct screaming that something was wrong, even though nothing about this felt immediately threatening. The third woman tilted her head, her voice quieter than the others but no less sure. "For you." He shook his head, trying to clear the dust and confusion. "No, I bought this land. Legally. No one told me," the silver-haired woman interrupted. "The paperwork brought you here. But the land called you." Eli blinked. The tallest woman stepped closer. She looked down at him with eyes the color of thunderclouds and said something that made every hair on his body stand straight. "We've been saving our virginity for you." And then she smiled. Not with sweetness, but with gravity. Like this wasn't some wild flirtation, but the beginning of something ancient. Eli didn't know whether to laugh, run, or draw the old pistol tucked beneath the seat of his truck. He did none of those. He just stood there, hands at his sides, heart thudding in his ears, staring up at the 3 women whose presence seemed to bend the rules of the world around them. He searched their faces for a punchline, a wink, anything that would hint this was some bizarre joke, but their expressions never broke. The woman with silver hair stepped closer, so close now that Eli could see the flecks of gold in her stormy eyes. Her voice softened but carried just the same weight. "Don't mistake what we said for seduction. This isn't about pleasure. It's about purpose." The word purpose landed hard. Eli had come here for quiet, to escape the debris of a life that had fallen apart in town debts, false friends, a string of half-built dreams. The farm was supposed to be a fresh start, not some mystical mess wrapped in riddles and beautiful Amazonian women. "You're going to have to explain what the hell this is," he said, his voice low, gravel thick. "Because I didn't sign up for some cult ritual." The bronze-haired woman laughed, not mockingly, but like she understood how insane it all sounded. "We're not a cult. We're keepers, guardians. This land, this house, this inheritance. It's not just about crops and cattle. It's a place of binding, of vows kept longer than lifetimes." Eli turned to the third woman, the one who hadn't spoken much yet. She was watching him like a hawk, her posture still and alert. "Why me?" he asked her. "Why now?" She didn't answer right away. Then finally she said, "Because you're the first one who came without greed in his heart." Eli's brows furrowed. "I paid for this land." "You did," the silver-haired woman replied. "But not for power, not to exploit. You came here to rebuild. That matters more than you know." A stillness settled over the space between them. The wind died down. The livestock didn't make a sound. It felt like the land itself was holding its breath. Then she added, "We made a vow, Eli. Not just to protect this place, but to keep our bodies, Our lineage, untouched until the one meant to renew the covenant arrived. He swallowed hard. A covenant? With who? All will be revealed, the bronze-haired woman murmured. But understand this. Our virginity isn't some prize. It's a symbol of restraint, of patience, of sacrifice. Eli didn't know what to say. The ground beneath his boots suddenly felt sacred, not just dirt. And you really think I'm the one you've been waiting for? The silver-haired woman stepped even closer. We don't think, she said. We know. The soil knows. The animals know. The air knows. And whether you believe or not, so do you. Eli's chest tightened. A strange pressure bloomed behind his eyes. Something about all of this felt right and terrifying. Eli followed them without speaking, not because he trusted them, but because something in him, something older than reason, urged his legs to move. The tallest woman, the one with the silver hair, led him across the field with effortless grace, like she belonged to the land as much as the wheat and wind. The other two flanked him again, just as they had when he first arrived. But now the mood had shifted. The air was heavier, charged with something unspoken. They stopped at the farmhouse. It was larger than he'd expected. The structure looked ancient but solid, made from thick beams of old pine and weathered stone that didn't crack or creak under time. Ivy clung to the walls like veins on skin, and the windows had a subtle shimmer to them, as if whatever was inside didn't quite want to be seen from the outside. Come in, the red-haired woman Magdalene said quietly. Inside, the house breathed warmth. Not just heat from the stone hearth, but something deeper, like the walls had memory. The scent of lavender and wood smoke lingered in the air, and a long wooden table stretched across the room, carved with symbols he didn't recognize. This way, Helena said. The silver-haired woman led him toward a small study lined with books and strange artifacts. She knelt beside an old chest in the corner and opened it carefully, revealing stacks of parchment sealed in wax and a thick bundle wrapped in crimson cloth. She unwrapped it slowly and placed the contents on the table. Eli's breath caught. It was a contract, but not like any he'd ever seen. The parchment was yellowed, the ink nearly black, the handwriting beautiful and unnervingly precise. Symbols lined the margins, some geometric, some like runes, others resembling eyes, keys, and flames. And at the bottom, unmistakably, was the signature of his late uncle, Jonas Cutter. What is this? Eli asked. The original covenant, Helena said, touching the edge with reverence. Signed by your bloodline 3 generations ago. That's impossible. My uncle never mentioned any of this. He was a drunk and a cattleman, not a priest. He wasn't always drunk, said Ruth, the bronze-haired one. Once, he believed in this place. He made promises to us, to the land, and to the spirit that dwells beneath it. Eli felt like the room was closing in. What kind of promises? Magdalene gently turned the parchment toward him. To protect us, to continue the line, to renew the bond through unity, and to remain until the land no longer needed him. Eli scanned the text. The words weren't just legalese, they read like scripture. The phrasing was poetic and deliberate, and though it shouldn't have meant anything to him, it stirred something inside. A name kept repeating, the Keeper. And beneath that, the final line chilled him to the bone. The blood must remain unbroken. The joining must be willing. The virgin guard shall not be defiled but chosen. His name had been scrawled in fresh ink at the bottom, but the contract was dated a week ago, and Jonas Cutter had died 3 months before that. Eli sat in the worn leather chair as the 3 women stood quietly around him, their eyes fixed on his face like they were watching a prophecy unfold in real time. The contract signed, sealed, and impossibly updated with his name, lay open on the table like it had been waiting decades just for him to arrive and read it. None of this made sense, except it kind of did. He thought back to the last conversation he ever had with Uncle Jonas. The old man had been frail, bedridden, but lucid in a way that made Eli uncomfortable. He'd said things Eli had written off as the ramblings of someone too close to death and too full of bourbon. The land knows when it's hungry, boy. You feed it right, it feeds you back. Don't ever forget that. At the time, Eli thought he was talking about cattle rotation or crop cycles, but maybe that wasn't what Jonas meant at all. They're still there, Eli, still waiting. I couldn't do what they needed. But you were born closer to the soil than I ever was. You don't run when things get hard. Back then, Eli just nodded and changed the subject. He didn't want to dwell on whatever regrets were eating away at the old man's conscience. But now those words pounded in his ears with terrifying clarity. You said Jonas signed this 3 generations ago. Eli muttered, still staring at the document. But this copy, this is new, and it has my name on it. Helena, standing by the hearth, nodded solemnly. Because the contract exists outside of time. It renews when it finds a willing heir. I didn't sign anything. You did, Ruth said softly. Not with pen and ink, but with your decision to come here. Magdalene moved forward and set a small black-bound journal on the table. He left this for you. Eli's heart stopped for a beat. He recognized the handwriting even before he opened it. Jonas's scrawl was inside. The opening page was dated the day before his death. Eli, if you're reading this, then you've come to the farm. Good. You were always meant to. I didn't tell you the truth not because I didn't trust you, but because I was ashamed. I failed them. I broke the bond, and I've paid for it every day since. You're not just inheriting dirt and fences, boy. You're inheriting a covenant, one that requires presence, patience, and courage. If you walk away, you'll be free. No one will stop you, but the land will suffer, and so will they. Jonas had signed the page with shaking hands, but the final line was underlined twice. You were chosen because you won't see them as burdens but as equals. That's the only way this works. Eli closed the journal slowly. 3 women, a sacred promise, a strange, living contract. And now him. The worst part was deep down. Something in his bones agreed with all of it. He didn't want to walk away. Not yet. The night fell quick in the valley, swallowing the sky in a sea of dark blue and pinprick stars. The house, though ancient, hummed with quiet life. Oil lamps flickered in every room, casting long shadows along the stone walls. Eli sat at the large wooden table, untouched stew in front of him, his fingers brushing the edge of the contract he couldn't stop rereading. Across from him, the 3 women sat in silence. Finally, he broke it. So if this is real, he said slowly, if I've been chosen or inherited some covenant, what exactly happens now? Ruth, seated nearest him, folded her hands on the table. Now comes the question of willingness. I haven't exactly said yes, he muttered. But you haven't run either, Magdalene replied, her green eyes catching the lamplight. That means more than you know. Helena stood and paced toward the hearth, her arms crossed, jaw tight like she was holding something back. There's only one rule we won't bend, she said. One condition that must be met before the covenant becomes whole. Eli leaned forward. Which is no intimacy, she said. Not until you understand what you're agreeing to. Not until you choose it fully, not out of temptation, but out of truth. He blinked. Wait, that's it? Magdalene laughed, not unkindly. You were expecting some kind of blood ritual or holy initiation? I don't know what I was expecting, Eli said, but after one of you tells me you've been saving your virginity for me, I figured the next step was more physical. Helena turned to face him fully. That vow wasn't about lust. It was about restraint. The virginity we've kept, it's sacred, symbolic. Not because we're afraid of the act, but because of what it means to share it. Eli watched her carefully. Her voice had softened, but her eyes stayed sharp. We're bound to this land, she continued. Our connection to it is deeper than blood. When one of us breaks that bond before the covenant is fulfilled, the land withers, the soil dies, the animals scatter. Magdalene nodded. It happened once before, decades ago. One of us gave herself to someone who wasn't chosen. The spring dried up. A year of rot followed. We almost didn't survive. Eli exhaled. The weight of their story was immense. So, it's not about sex. It's about timing, agreement, something spiritual. All of it, Ruth said gently. The act is a ritual, but it only works when the heart is ready, when the soul recognizes the role. Eli pushed the bowl of stew aside. His appetite had vanished. You think I'm that person? We know you are, Helena said. But that doesn't matter until you do. Eli stood slowly, the contract still clutched in his hand. The firelight danced along the walls, throwing ancient shadows across the floor. So what do I do now? Magdalene stood too. You stay, you learn, you live among us. And if you decide on your own that you're ready, Helena finished for her, then the covenant becomes whole. Morning broke with an eerie stillness. No birdsong, no wind through the trees. Just the low hum of something deeper, like the land itself, had fallen into a watchful silence. Eli rose before the women, slipping out of the farmhouse and walking barefoot into the open field. The dew was thick on the grass, but the earth beneath it was warm. Alive, he crouched down and pressed his palm to the ground. It pulsed, not in a literal heartbeat, but in something that felt alive. Not like any farmland he'd worked before. This wasn't just soil. It was listening. Looking for answers in the dirt? Ruth's voice broke the silence, soft but amused. He looked up. She stood a few yards away, barefoot like him, dressed in a simple linen tunic that hung just above her knees. Her hair was braided down one shoulder, still damp from the morning wash. Eli straightened, brushing his hand off on his jeans. Trying to understand what I got myself into. She joined him, kneeling beside the spot he'd touched. Then this is the right place to start. Ruth pressed her hand into the soil, fingers splaying gently. This land has memory, Eli. It remembers who walks on it, who tends it, who harms it, and who belongs to it. He looked at her. And it's just alive? Aware? She nodded. It's been here longer than us. Longer than your uncle. Even longer than the first covenant. There are things beneath the roots that listen. Things that test us. Eli swallowed. And how do they test me? She pointed at the sprout beside them, a small stalk of corn no higher than his ankle. That wasn't here yesterday. He stared at it. Sure enough, the dirt around it was freshly disturbed. He hadn't noticed it when he stepped out. You're saying that grew overnight? I'm saying, she replied, that when the land feels someone right, it responds. They stood in silence for a long moment. Eli looked out across the acres that had once seemed dead on paper. But now he noticed the soft shoots emerging at the far edges, the thickening of grass, the quiet return of birdsong just beyond the fence line. Helena says you're tied to this land, Eli murmured. That your bodies, your vows, they keep the land alive. Yes, Ruth said simply. But we were never meant to do it alone. Eli turned to her, watching the morning light catch her face, the dust on her skin, the way her eyes didn't blink when they looked at him. And now that I'm here? She didn't answer immediately. Then she whispered, now the land's waking up. Behind them, the farmhouse creaked, as if acknowledging her words. Eli felt something shift inside him. Not just duty, not just curiosity, but connection. For the first time since he'd set foot on the property, he didn't feel like a trespasser. He felt like part of it, and somewhere beneath the soil, something ancient stirred and listened. Later that evening, when the heat had drained from the air and the sky turned violet, the four of them sat on the wide porch of the farmhouse. No one said much, just the creak of wooden chairs, the chirp of insects, and the low moan of wind across the hills. Eli had spent the day helping Ruth move water barrels. He'd mended 2 fences and learned the livestock's names from Magdalene, who somehow knew the temperament of every cow and every stubborn goat by heart. Helena had watched him from the garden, silently, a faint approval in her gaze. It had been a long, physical day, but for the first time in months, Eli wasn't tired in the same way. His body ached, but his mind felt clear. Magdalene broke the silence first. You weren't the first to come here. Eli looked over. I figured. Jonas had to have tried something before. She shook her head. Not him. I mean before you. Others. Men who thought they wanted the land. Or us. Ruth sipped from her tin mug. They all failed. Helena's voice was calm but firm. One came with lawyers, another with workers and machines. One even brought a preacher, said we were heathens, claimed he'd cleansed the property. Magdalene scoffed. The well dried up 2 hours after he arrived. Eli raised a brow. You're serious? Helena met his eyes. Dead serious. The land knows. It always knows. And you just stayed? He asked, glancing between them. Waited through all that? No, Ruth said quietly. We almost left. Her voice had changed. Lower, softer, almost a confession. There was one night, she continued, years ago. The winter after Jonas broke the pact. The crops rotted. Animals died in their sleep. The snow fell early and wouldn't stop. We ran out of firewood, out of reasons to stay. Magdalene added, we packed everything, every document, every tool. We were going to leave at dawn. Eli leaned forward. So what stopped you? Ruth looked at him. The tree. Helena nodded slowly. There's an old sycamore behind the barn. It hadn't bloomed in over a decade. That night, in the middle of a blizzard, it flowered. How? Eli blinked. What? Full bloom, Ruth said. Snow still falling. Petals untouched. We stood there in the dark, in the snow, watching this tree whisper to us without words. And we knew. You knew I'd come? No, Helena said. We knew someone still would. That the bond hadn't died. Just gone dormant. Magdalene reached over and touched Eli's forearm. Her fingers were calloused, her grip strong, but her eyes were wide and sincere. We stayed because of faith. Not in gods or myths, but in the soil. In the idea that whoever was meant to finish what was started would find their way here. Eli looked out into the dark field, where stars blinked low on the horizon like watching eyes. "And now I'm here," he said. Helena exhaled. "Yes, and the land hasn't bloomed like this since the first keeper." The porch fell quiet again, but the silence didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like the house itself was listening and smiling. Eli woke before sunrise, his dreams still clinging to him like smoke visions of roots curling around his legs, whispers rising from the soil in a language he didn't know but somehow understood. The earth had spoken to him, not in words, but in sensation, in pulse, in breath. And when he opened his eyes, he wasn't surprised to see Helena standing in the doorway, already dressed, waiting. She said nothing, only nodded for him to follow. They walked in silence past the barn, through a narrow path he hadn't noticed before. Trees arched overhead, their limbs forming a tunnel. The air grew cooler, heavier with scent like crushed sage and rain. They came to a clearing surrounded by stone markers, old and lichen-covered, arranged in a rough circle. In the center was a pool no wider than a wagon wheel, the surface so still it mirrored the stars above. "This is the heart basin," Helena said softly. "The center of the covenant, the place where the first keeper bound themselves to the land." Eli stepped closer. "This is where it started?" Helena nodded. "Before laws, before fences, when people made vows with their hands in the soil and their blood in the water." She turned to him. "You've asked what it means to be chosen. It means more than living here, more than working the land. It means becoming part of it, not owning, not managing, joining." Ruth and Magdalene emerged from the trees, carrying a carved wooden box between them. They placed it near the pool and opened it to reveal 3 simple items: a copper ring, a small obsidian blade, and a leather-bound book older than anything Eli had ever seen. "This isn't about tradition," Ruth said. "It's about continuation." Eli looked from the objects to the women. "And if I walk away now, you'll be free," Magdalene said. "No one will stop you. No curse, no punishment. But the land will sleep again," Helena added, "and so will we." Eli stared down into the pool. For a moment, he saw his reflection. Then, briefly, not just himself but his uncle, younger, healthier, standing beside 3 different women in similar formation. "They tried," he whispered. Helena stepped beside him. "They failed." He doubted. He loved with hesitation. He stayed too long, and then ran too fast. "The land remembers hesitation." Eli looked up at her. "And me? What if I make the same mistake?" "You won't," she said, "because you listen." The statement didn't feel like praise. It felt like recognition. Like she wasn't asking him to prove anything, only to acknowledge something already inside him. Eli reached down and touched the copper ring. It was warm. The obsidian blade trembled slightly in its slot, as if it, too, was waiting for his hand. He looked at all 3 women. "If I say yes, I'm not just agreeing to stay. I'm agreeing to become one of you." Ruth smiled. "Not one of us. One with us." And for the first time, Eli didn't feel like a guest in their world. He felt like he'd just found his place in it. Eli stood at the edge of the heart basin, the copper ring in one hand, the obsidian blade in the other. The book remained closed, resting on its velvet lining as if it held the breath of centuries within its pages. Behind him, the first rays of dawn crept over the ridge, casting amber light across the clearing. The 3 women waited, not with urgency, but with patience born of ritual. They didn't coax him, didn't pressure him. They simply waited. He looked down at the blade. It was small, not meant to wound, but to mark. A tool of choice. Helena stepped forward, her voice barely more than a whisper. "All we ask is a drop, not of sacrifice, of intention." Eli drew the blade slowly across his palm, not deep, just enough. The cut stung, but he didn't flinch. The blood beaded, dark and alive. He let it fall into the still water of the basin. The surface rippled instantly, not outward like a pebble dropped in, it drew inward, as though the water had taken something from him and swallowed it with purpose. The soil around the stones trembled, ever so slightly. Magdalene stepped forward and took the ring from his hand. "The ring isn't for marriage," she said, sliding it onto his bloodied finger. It's for the vow. To the land. To us. To the roll. Eli looked down. The copper seemed to fuse with his skin. Not literally, but symbolically, like it belonged there. Like it had been waiting. Ruth opened the book. The pages were blank, except for the last line, written in a fresh hand that couldn't have been older than a minute. Eli Cutter, keeper. Bound by choice. No flames. No lightning. Just a quiet sense of something falling into place. Like a door had opened and 1,000 locked rooms had finally been aligned. Helena reached for his hand and placed it over her heart. "We're not virgins because we were waiting for love," she said. "We're virgins because we were waiting for alignment. A convergence." Ruth pressed her forehead to his shoulder. "Now, there's balance." Magdalene knelt and touched the ground beside his feet. "Now, there's future." Eli inhaled deeply, and something inside him settled. Like a question he didn't know he'd been asking his whole life had finally been answered. He didn't feel trapped. He didn't feel indebted. He felt chosen. "What happens now?" he asked, voice low. Helena tilted her head. "Now we begin." They led him back through the woods as the morning light painted everything gold. The barn doors swung open on their own. A hawk circled overhead. The earth beneath his boots felt warm again, like it recognized him. As they reached the porch, the three women stood with him side by side, no longer towering over him in mystery, but walking beside him in unity. He looked out at the land that once felt foreign and barren. Now it looked fertile. Now it looked like home. And for the first time since the deed was signed, Eli Cutter truly believed. The farm was his, but more importantly, he was theirs.